Thanks very much, Acting Speaker. It's a pleasure to make a contribution on the Fire Services Property Amendment Bill 2025. Acting Speaker, I'll start off by making the point that as much as the government wants to talk about supporting our emergency services, this bill is primarily around a new tax. I don't think there's any member in this chamber that doesn't support their emergency services. In my electorate, I'll go as far as to say we probably rely on our emergency services and volunteers more than any other area in the state. Our volunteer CFA firefighters are the backbone of our community. Our SES do a great job, down to our surf lifesavers who look after the beaches along the 90-mile beach there. It's an area that's highly dependent on volunteers. But this bill will increase the cost of living and creates a new tax. The bill says it's expanding to include supports for the SES and 000 and those sorts of entities, but they were previously funded out of general revenue. So if this isn't about simply raising a new tax, the government must show us where that commensurate saving is in general revenue, and I haven't heard a speaker yet outline that. Now, there's an extra $600 million to be raised, and that's got to come from somewhere, and it's coming out of the pockets of property holders. Now, it is simply a case of moving the funding of agencies previously provided out of all the other taxes we paid to a new levy, The renaming of the Fire Services Property Levy fools no one. And I was here, Acting Speaker, when that came into play in 2013, and there was a few in the chamber that were not. And the reason was that it was moved from insurance onto council rates is because there are a number of people in our community who benefited from our fire service response who either were not insured or were underinsured, and those who were paying full insurance were paying overs. So the idea of moving it to the rates-based system was that everybody who was a recipient of fire services had to pay their fair share. I can remember sitting in my office with people ringing my office saying, well, I'm not insured, now I have to pay this new tax. And well, yes, because you're the very person we're trying to catch, because you were a beneficiary of the fire services when the fires hit last year. And that was a common discussion. That was the background to it. The Fire Services Property Levy made it fairer on everybody. The other services that this incorporates have always been funded out of general revenue. There was not an intention to include them in the Fire Services Levy at the time. But if we want to do that, and no one's denying our SES and 000 need greater levels of support to deal with the challenges that they have to deal with, I don't think any member of the chamber would disagree with that. But it's cost shifting. We're raising another $600 million to fund those services. Just someone point to us where the tax cuts are coming out of general revenue. Because what that's happening is that money's still going to be collected and it's going to go into paying this excessive debt and the interest on this debt that the current government's incurred. Over $1 million a day in interest we're heading to. $1 billion every 6 weeks in interest without paying off your capital. So it fools nobody. It fools nobody that this is nothing other than a tax grab. The impact that this will have on housing and rental properties is disastrous. We already have land tax increases being passed on to renters. We have rates, insurances on rental providers going through the roof. And now we're going to have another tax. And your mum and dad investors, and there are plenty of mum and dad investors, the majority of investors in second property are mum and dad investors, will leave that and either invest into state or go into the stock market, and rental properties will again be in decline. And then we'll have people coming in from both sides of the chamber saying we've got a housing crisis. Housing availability is not there. Yet we introduce taxes that are putting pressure on rental providers and forcing them out of the system. I mean, you just cannot have it both ways. It is as simple as that. Acting Speaker, I spoke to one of my councils last week, and we had other councils from Gippsland in this week, from our area, the Gippsland Local Government Network, now known as One Gippsland, I should say, and they spoke openly about their concern that this is going on their rate bills. They said people only read the bottom line of their rate bills. How can they put up rates when the fire services levy on that rate bill is almost double before they start? You know, one councillor said we're going to have, if we put up rates to any level that will exacerbate the blowout on the bottom of that council bill, it'll end up with pitchforks in the street, was the term that was used. So I would urge the speakers on that side who are yet to speak on this bill, if this is not a new money grab, stand up and tell us whether $610 million in savings is coming out of general revenue, because that's where the SES, that's where OOO and these agencies have previously been funded. Explain why you're doubling the fire services levy, but not giving the tax respite in another area. I want to briefly mention about the exemptions that have been promised. I can't believe we're in this chamber debating a bill that talks about exemptions to CFA volunteers, and we have no detail on how it's going to work. I heard the member for Frankston before, and it sounds like CFA volunteers are going to have to pay their levy and then be bothered to fill in the paperwork to get the repayment returned to them. I mean, what a disastrous system that will be. Will all volunteers be eligible for this? The volunteers who attend every fire, I'm assuming they will be. What about the non-active members of the CFA? Do they get it? Because when this has been discussed in other jurisdictions in the past, that has caused angst within those services. What about our surf lifesavers that I touched on before? What about our ambulance ACOs? They do pretty important volunteer work in our community, just not in the area of fire. I'd say equally important work in our community. Are they going to be able to access this eligibility that they don't have to pay? The bottom line is we're debating another bill in the chamber where the government is openly saying they don't know how it's going to work. That detail's got to be sorted out. It would be good if we had a bill come into this chamber where all the details sorted out so we know what we're actually debating and we can prosecute the detail of it. That's how this parliament should work. That's how a parliament in any jurisdiction should work. We should be debating and prosecuting the detail, not having people standing up and saying, oh, here's the bill, here's the law, but we've got to work that stuff out down the track. Just trust us. We should be debating that detail in here, and I only hope that between houses we get that level of detail that we can prosecute those matters and make sure there is even and fair representation. I'd like someone to stand up there and tell me, are our ambulance ACOs and our surf lifesaving volunteers going to get this eligibility, this exemption